enjoy getting emails as much as I do. So what I'll say though is that there's really, it's more about how actionable is the item. And there's two groups of notifications in ACC. There's action required and then just other. These are like your FYI notifications, and these are, you're getting notified because you're expected to do something.
Yeah, someone has assigned you an issue or something like that.
So the issues module has two subsettings, one for when a member is assigned or when a member is mentioned in like a comment on an issue. Now, this is the one I recommend setting this to hourly, because you don't want issues to linger, but at the same time, you don't want to absolutely bury somebody's inbox in like BIM 360 issues. Versus if we get down to like submittals, there's an actual contractual tie to submittals. When the submittal comes in from the GC, the clock starts ticking on the contract. So you may want your document manager to have an instantaneous setup on submittals, so that if they ever get assigned, they immediately know, hey, that there is a submittal, it's hot, it's cooking, and you need to get on, kind of thing. But most people, they dial these down to either hourly or sometimes even daily. So like they just get a wrap up at the end of the day of everything that they need to address. We do that when coordination gets really heavy and we create a lot of coordination issues. We change it to a daily for a lot of users, just so like at the end of the day, all the issues we created in our meeting don't just like blast their email. They get a summary.
I could see someone is away for the office for a couple of days and they come back. If this isn't set up properly, they have like dozens and dozens of emails, right?
That's correct. Okay, let's switch back here. On to the next one. So the next step after you configure your people and your permissions is to configure your products. So for today's conversation, we're going to focus on Autodesk Docs, and we're going to focus on design collaboration. And lumped into design collaboration is the coordination module, because they really are tied together now in the ACC ecosystem. We're going to exclude build and we're going to exclude cost management. But I will say that we, as a design firm, a predominantly AEC firm, are using build in DD and CD and going into CA. So while it is a construction tool, you can definitely retool it to support design. And the way you actually get into each of these, you have to think like the template has modules, just like a project has modules. So if I want to program my docs, I actually go to the dropdown and I go to the docs module in my template, and then I'm programming it for the actual template. You'll also find that there's a lot of things that you can't do in a template that you can do at the project level. And we'll talk about a couple things. So we'll dig deeper into setup, but then once your stuff is all set up, you can publish your template. And once you toggle that on, anyone that you've given access to can create a new project from that template, right? So that's how you as an admin can create your template and give it to like a BIM manager and say, all right, BIM manager, you can go ahead and manage all the K-12 or higher ed projects as needed, right? So before we get into docs and folder structure, nothing's more exciting than reviewing folder structures, right? I want to take a moment to talk about members, companies, and roles. This is extremely important. And Nick, thanks for sharing episode 1 with me. That definitely gave me a lot to address here. So the first one is the question of like managing members. So there's
if I can say something quickly, we're chatting a bit just before the show, and there was one question that came up during the first session is, do you add users? You're going to get to it, you don't have to answer now. But do you add users to the admin portal? You add them straight for each individual project. And I've always done it to admin, but some people thought it was a better idea to do it for each project.
Correct. So I will tell you how I have come to manage them, and it works for me, and it's worked for me for the better part of the last decade. I approach the Autodesk Construction Cloud. You want the data in it to be as clean as your ERP. You really want the companies to be clean and tight. You want the roles to be clean and tight. And what I will do, along with all of our processes, it's basically internal versus external. if it is a CPL employee that is joining the firm, I go into the back end and I program their default role in company so that every project they ever get added to going forward, they automatically get the correct permissions and company, right? And that just, so to the project managers, they just invite the, Johnny, the intern, and it works, right? For external people, I totally understand the need for project admins to be able to just rapidly add external consultants as needed. So I don't require them to go through us to get users added to their project. They can just add members. They just have to follow our processes and set the roles correctly. And then what we'll do, it's an unfortunate task, but it facilitates the way it works. We have to go in and we have to routinely audit and clean up users, right? That is just, there's no good bulk tool to do this. I know people have built them, but this is a huge struggle that we have managing the ACC at size. We're knocking on almost 700 active projects on ACC, and like policing members is just huge activity, and there's no good bulk tools for managing it. So if you know of a good solution, let me know, because I spend a lot of effort just cleaning up our ACC stuff. Companies are also really, really important. Like, remember, try to approach this as an ERP. It's a database. So one of the first things I recommend anybody that's getting into Autodesk Construction Cloud, before the genie is out of the bottle, go into the admin settings and turn off the ability to create new companies, because people will fat finger company names. And if you don't have this turned off, when they hit enter, it will just automatically create a new company. And then your company list will get heavily polluted with like nonsense company names or misspelled company names and stuff like that. So you want to keep that back end nice and clean and tight. And then finally, roles. So roles are super, super important. And what you're looking at in the middle here is our default roles. We carved these way down from the Autodesk out of the box roles you get, because we went through and we actually created definitions for each of the roles. In the template settings, or like this is actually at the project level, when you're setting these roles, the only thing you're setting is, when I assign this role to a user, do they get project member or project admin rights? That's all you're setting here. But the function of the role goes much, much deeper. It has implications on your folder structure, implications on permissions. And just to kind of show you how we have ours organized, we have basically internal in red and external in blue. And if you really dig into these, you'll find that, like, why do I have a VDC manager role and a BIM manager role? Well, BIM is internal and VDC is external, because we don't use VDC as a term in my company, but I know that GCs do. So we try to align it with common terminology, but sometimes things come up. So as long as your roles are well defined, they generally will just work pretty well. One of the things we ran into is we ended up having to remove designer and intern, which were two roles that were in our permission stack. And the reason we did that was architects and engineers kept going in and finding users that had the role architect assigned to them, and they would change their role from architect to intern, because I guess it offended their sensibilities. And then they would effectively lock that person out of the project. And then we would get a support ticket saying, hey, I can't access my project anymore. And we'd go in, and lo and behold, somebody took away their architect role. So these are the things you kind of have to think about when you're setting up your ecosystem. So just, you really want to be careful with roles here. And just a side note, I don't have a good slide for this, but if you delete a role that's in use, it will put in brackets next to it everywhere it shows up in Autodesk Construction Cloud removed, which is super confusing for your users to see, like, intern removed, and it's like, what does that mean? So you want to be really careful adjusting roles, especially removing them once they're in use. All right, so we're going to get into the meat and the potatoes of the project setup stuff. We're going to get into document management. So the first thing is the folder structure. And Nick, in episode 1, you talked about the creation of folders. So I'm not going to spend too much time on, like, how does one create a folder? I do have 2 important references on this deck, which I'll gladly share with you, Nick, so you could distribute. The 2 file path limitations, one is for Autodesk Docs and the other is for the desktop connector. Basically, you have a pretty decent length. Like, I think you can go a maximum of 25 files deep before like docs will stop you from creating new subfolders. The bigger issue you're going to run into is not necessarily the folder structure on the cloud. It's if you need to sync that data locally with the Autodesk desktop connector. So with that, I think it's like a 250 character limit or 240 something character limit. Anything beyond that, and like the data won't sync back and forth, and there's all kinds of limitations with Civil 3D that they're working through, and it's constantly under development. But like, what you want to do is you want to keep your folders kind of simple if you can.
So are you saying, for example, if you link a CAD file inside of Revit through the desktop connector, if there are too many subfolders and the path is longer than 250 characters, you might have issues there?
Yes, absolutely. And also remember that in the local folder path that Autodesk Construction Cloud creates for like the desktop connector, it includes the project name. So the length of your project name can eat up your, like how much space you have on the back end for file storage. So that's why we actually ended up having, we used to put our job number in all of our job names, but we had to stop doing that because we realized, oh my goodness, we're taking away a ton of file path for our users. So going in and setting up your permissions is pretty straightforward. An important thing to note is that you can only set up permissions in a template by role. You cannot do it by company or by user. There was a recent caveat to that if the user is defined in the template already, you can. But my best practice for everyone is just do everything by role. And then it's much easier to add and remove roles than it is to do it by individual users. So you can see on the left, these are all the roles we have defined out of the box for my firm. There's architect, engineer, external consultant, and inspector. And that's it. We have other roles that are defined specifically for use in Autodesk Build, but this is all we need. This facilitates design collaboration. It facilitates coordination. It's everything we need with 3 roles, of which only one of them is used for people outside the firm. An important thing to note is there is now an everyone role. So be very careful with everyone role. We actually have a hidden folder that everyone is the only role that can see that folder. And in it is a README file that says, if you can read this, you've been added incorrectly to the project, please contact your project admin. And it's just a check so that when someone goes to the project, they can see like, is this thing working or not? And roles are set at the folder, permissions are set at the folder level and they inherit downward. And this is really important to understand because this gives you really granular control. So talking about our external consultants, we've got the design folder, which is where we put all of our like teams for design collaboration. The external consultant role has view only access there, view and download to be more specific. But when they get to structural, we bump that up to external consultant, or whenever they get to whatever team they're filling in on, because sometimes we have internal consultants, sometimes we have external consultants. And what this means is that they can edit the information in their folder. They can access their stuff in design collaboration, but they can't edit anyone else's access. So you have very finite control over what they can see and what they can access. This is how you can create like specific access issues. So the question that comes up to me a lot is like, well, we don't want to put just everything on the cloud because anyone can access it. Well, that is one way of managing your data. But I think security is a big important thing to keep in mind when you're putting all your data in one place that other people can access. So in this example you're currently seeing, the role architect is assigned to the BIM plan folder because I would want the architect to be able to see the BIM plan. That could be a contractor, it could be owner, whatever. It's just the only folder under admin they can see is the BIM plan. They also have edit access to the design folder where the architectural and structural folders exist, right? Red and blue. So just remember that they can see the BIM plan and they can edit their Revit files. So the default behavior